I'm not aware that he has a problem in that regard, but if so, we have senior counsels in the department who would give advice on that. So and we all have to be sure that we're not crossing that line.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for being with us. I'd like to go back to some of your testimony on contacts with Russia. At the beginning in your opening statement, you said, "My testimony has not changed." Later, in response to some questions, you said, "I do now recall." And Mr. Attorney General, with all due respect, it's difficult to take your assurances under oath when you seem to change your testimony each time new evidence emerges. And specifically, you denied contact with Russians under oath during your confirmation hearings. That was revealed to be untrue given multiple meetings with an ambassador. Later, you refined your response to more narrowly focus on discussion of campaign-related matters, but you denied that campaign surrogates communicated with Russian agents. That was revealed to be untrue given the sworn statement offered by George Papadopoulos. You later again refined your answer, saying that you didn't remember Papadopoulos raising the issue in the March 2016 meeting, but once you remembered the meeting, you then remembered telling Papadopoulos to cease those conversations. You say that you cannot be expected to remember the details of what happened a year ago, but you are in fact a very seasoned prosecutor and a 20-year member of the United States Senate, United States Congress, who is presumably capable of mind and memory. So, Attorney General Sessions, did you as a prosecutor accept a defense of lack of recall?
Well, absolutely, people have a lack of recall.
Thank you.
We're
And
would you environment that we were operating in with so much happening and meetings occurring, you assume a lot of matters that aren't accurate.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. Would you instruct the attorneys who work for you at the Department of Justice to take at face value a defense of "I don't recall"?
If a person says they don't recall and has a justified reason for it, I certainly do.
And that was not the case in the situation of the police officer that Mr. Jeffries referred to. Let me move on to another matter. On November 11th, President Trump not only trusted the word of Vladimir Putin over the brave men and women who serve in our intelligence community, he proceeded to trash the reputations of its leaders. And I quote here, he said, "Give me a break, they are political hacks." The president went on to say that he believes Vladimir Putin when Putin says he absolutely did not meddle in our elections. Mr. Sessions, do you consider the leaders of our intelligence community, past and present, as political hacks?
I would say to you, the president speaks his mind as he chooses.
Is that a yes?
He also says he accepts their position.
I'm not asking about
the president.
I'm
not giving a yes or no. I've given you my answer.
So you have no opinion on whether they're political hacks or not?
I'm saying to you, I respect and value our intelligence community.
Great, that's good to hear. And when President Trump said that he believes Vladimir Putin, when Putin says he absolutely did not meddle in our election, help me refresh my memory. In January of this year, was it the unanimous opinion of our intelligence community that the Russian government did in fact meddle in our election?
I believe an opinion was expressed.
That was a yes?
I'm not aware of any dissent from that.
Okay, and to your knowledge, in the months since, has the intelligence community in any way changed its conclusion?
I'm not aware of it.
And on October 18th, when testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Sasse asked you if the department had taken adequate action to prevent election meddling in the future. You just said in response to some questions that you do believe this is a danger. Have you requested a review of what laws need to be updated in order to protect our elections from foreign interference?
I have not, and would be pleased to work with you to deal with the deficiencies we have.
That's great.
Congress would have to deal with that, not have to pass the laws.
You would want to appoint a special counsel on that issue?
Maybe I misunderstood your question. What special counsel? I thought you was asking, should we have laws, new laws, to deal with?
Well, I'm asking if you're going to investigate what has happened with the meddling in our elections.
Well, that's part of the special prosecutor.
Great.
It's not, I'm not participating in that. He has
Let me move on
responsibility
to
for it.
Mr. Miller, because I just have a few seconds here. Considering your prominent role in the Trump campaign, did you work closely with and communicate with Stephen Miller when he worked on the campaign?
I worked with him. He'd worked with me previously.
Thank you. And did Mr. Miller tell you that he was working on a letter with President Trump which detailed the president's reasons for firing then FBI Director Comey?
Mr. Miller is a high government official close to the President of the United States, and I'm not at liberty to reveal the nature of any conversations we may have had.
Are you claiming executive privilege?
I'm not claiming executive privilege.
So
I'm following the long-established policies of the Department of Justice.
The president has not invoked executive privilege, and so I understand you're
Time of
just
the gentlewoman
declining
has expired.
to answer the question.
Chair
Point of
recognizes-
parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Is there authority in this committee to permit a witness to refuse to answer a question without properly invoking a privilege? And if not, what is the appropriate response from the chairman to enforce the committee's ability to do proper oversight?
The chair recognizes that senior officials from both administrations, the current and past, and long-standing before that, have long stated their ability to not answer questions regarding communications at the highest level of our government.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may be heard, I do not believe there is any such privilege or any right to assert a refusal to answer a question simply because
The gentleman
it's
is
uncomfortable.
not stating a parliamentary
Well, I'm
inquiry.
asking the chairman
The
to
gentleman
rule
will
so we can
suspend.
appeal the ruling of the chair. If you're going to prevent us from getting answers to these questions.
There is no ruling of the chair. The
Well,
gentleman
then I would
is out
ask
of
that the
order.
witness be directed to answer the gentlelady from Washington's questions.
That is not a parliamentary inquiry. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Handel, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Sessions, for being here. And I want to say a special thank you to Mrs. Sessions for being here as well, and for, frankly, your patience and commitment through the many chapters of the General Sessions' distinguished career. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
I wanted to ask a pretty direct question, because there's been so much said here today about Russia and what you've testified to and not testified to, and a great deal of parsing of words, along with what I would call not so veiled comments that frankly are an attempt to impugn your candor, your integrity, and your reputation. So I will ask very bluntly, have you ever deliberately lied or sought to deliberately mislead the United States Senate or this body here today?
No, I have not.
Thank you. Let the record show that it was a direct yes or no on that, and it was an emphatic no. I want to ask about civil asset forfeiture program. As you know, under your leadership, the program was reinstated back in July, and you started some additional practices there. In March, the Inspector General had a report and offered several different suggestions that might be put in place, recommendations put in place for the program. Can you give an update on that? Or if you don't have it today, you can send it to me.
Well, thank you. I can. We spent considerable time evaluating the program. We recognize the concerns expressed in Congress, and I've been well aware of that, having seen it come up in the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. So we worked hard to produce a policy that it reproduce, I guess, the policy that it had been in place for as much as 40 years. It only recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, been reversed. The law enforcement community was very concerned about the reversal of the sharing and the partnership that we have established. Every federal agency and every U.S. attorney has to work closely every day with our state and local law enforcement. 85% of all law enforcement in America is state and local. This has been one of the glues that hold that team together. So I would say that we've given. Also, when we reinstated it, I directed the appointment, which will occur soon, of an individual to be an accountability officer for the whole forfeiture process. to receive any complaints we get from Congress or judges or lawyers or victims that claim victimhood, and make sure we are doing it in the right way. We've shortened the time for the government to respond. We've said that we won't partner with a local law enforcement agency if they don't undergo training from the federal government to ensure they know how to handle forfeitures. And I've cautioned against seizing of homes and real estate unless people have clear proof.
Super, thank you. Moving to a different topic, as you probably know, there was a recent media firestorm around what was a bipartisan piece of legislation, the Ensuring Patient Access and Effective Drug Enforcement Act, a 2016 law, which, as I said, had a great bipartisanship. It raised the standard for DEA to issue immediate suspension orders against pharmacies and prescription drug distributions who might be contributed to the opioid epidemic. From your viewpoint, however, have you seen, what have been the actual effects on prosecution and administrative actions around the drug distributors, and has the DEA been negatively impacted by that particular law?
First, we would use the laws we have aggressively, both as to physicians and pharmacies and also distribution companies for big pharma, and we will hold them to account. Congress will establish the laws. So this bill passed with both DEA and Department of Justice acknowledgement or acquiescence. And I'm not sure to what extent it may have had a negative impact. I would have to get back with you, make sure I'm accurate in my statements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Snyder, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the Attorney General, General Sessions, for coming here today. I wish you had been here earlier, but we're glad you're here. I appreciate your patience and giving us all the opportunity to speak very much. As I sat listening to the hearing today, there were a number of things that I was looking to hear or better understand. First, this was, I believe, an opportunity for you to set the record straight on context between the Trump campaign and Russia. As has been noted by others, we continue to learn new evidence that demonstrates previous answers have been at best incomplete, at worst inaccurate, and I think there's still some questions around that. Second, I'm looking to understand what steps the Department of Justice is taking to protect our elections from foreign interference in the future. 2016 wasn't the first time, it won't be the last time that Russians and others will try to interfere in our elections. And we have to take steps to make sure that the integrity of our elections remains solid and that we thwart any efforts, regardless of where they're coming from foreign entities to undermine our elections. And third, I've been looking for answers on policies pursued by this Department of Justice that I believe are taking aims at the rights of Americans, from undermining voting rights to restricting LGBTQ rights to targeting immigrants. We've talked about a lot of things. I would really like to turn my attention, though, to the idea of ensuring the integrity of our elections, protecting them from foreign influence. You've been asked a couple times today, I believe, what steps you've taken since you spoke in a couple weeks ago, October 18th, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, what you were doing. Senator Sass asked you there if the department is doing enough to prevent foreign interference in our elections. Just to repeat what you said, and I'll quote, "Probably not. We're not. And the matter is so complex that for most of us, we are not able to grasp the technical dangers that are out there. These are real dangers to our elections, and our elections are the foundations of our democracy." You also said at that time, several weeks ago, it requires a real review. But today you said there is no review taking place. So my first question is, I'm very concerned. With the 2018 elections less than 1 year away, and given your acknowledgement that this is a serious, complex matter that's deserving of a real review, specifically, what steps have you taken to protect our elections next year?
You raise a good point. I have not followed through to see where we are on that, and I will personally take action to do so. There are a lot of things been happening. We're working on a lot of great agenda items, but this one is important, and I acknowledge that. And I should be able to give you better information today than I am.
And I appreciate that there are many things that are important, but I would hazard to the state, nothing more important to our democracy than the integrity of our elections. And as the head of the Department of Justice, it's important that as a nation, as others have said, that justice remained blind, carrying the balanced scale without a finger on the scale. We need to do that, but protecting our elections is important. What steps does the department need to do to address these issues? What can we be looking forward as the next steps?
Well, one of the things that needs to be done is our states need to review their own vulnerabilities. I would say our FBI has extraordinary capabilities when it comes to hacking and those kind of issues. We probably need to work on that with them. They should have a very important role. They're highly sophisticated in that. And then our intelligence communities also, to the extent that this is driven by some foreign power, then we're dealing with international, potential international involvement. So all of those agencies and the states need to be involved, I would think.
And it was
Congress, I appreciate your interest, because if we need legislation, it'll take some aggressive push to get anything.
Hold that time to
through,
come back to that.
at least through the Senate. I know you
with
can
another
do that.
question. But you said earlier that others have touched on this, that the intelligence community has said Russia did try to interfere in our elections in 2016. Do you feel that that is still a statement of truth, or is it open for question?
I have no basis to dispute that. I do think they've said that they don't believe votes were changed.
Right. As I see I'm about to run out of time, my last question, I'll jump to the end, is to what you were just touching on. Can I ask for your commitment to provide a briefing to those of us on this committee that are interested in addressing this problem, making sure, irrespective of whether it's a Democratic or Republican state community, that we have safe, sound elections with integrity? Will you meet with us?
I would be glad to. I
Thank
think
you.
that would be valuable.
With that, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Sessions, thank you for appearing before our committee today. It's always great to talk to you, and it's always great to have the opportunity to communicate. As a foundational principle of our great American experiment enshrined in our Constitution, religious liberty ought to be protected at every turn in our nation's history under every administration. Last month, you issued a memo which focused on ensuring First Amendment protections for religious groups and individuals. The last two Congresses, Senator Lee and I, introduced the First Amendment Defense Act, which you were a co-sponsor of. As you know, this legislation ensures the fundamental right to exercise one's religion by prohibiting the federal government from denying or excluding a person from receiving a federal grant, contract, loan, license, certification, accreditation, employment, or other similar position or status based on their religious belief in marriage. Can you explain to us what inspired your October 6th memo and why you think it is important for the Department of Justice to issue such guidelines?
Well, I've cared about this for a long time, and there's a lot of work has been done. I felt that there's some abuses that have occurred pretty clearly. We've had to settle some lawsuits because the government overreached, and I would say what we need to understand at the most fundamental level is the First Amendment allows the free exercise of religion. Doesn't just allow you to think what you want to think, meet in a closet somewhere and never express yourself. It allows the free exercise. And I think to a degree we've not respected that in recent years. And our opinion is based on the law. We believe it's based on the Constitution, and it's a guidance to ensure that the agencies of our government know what the fundamental principles are when they issue regulations and cite people for wrongdoing.
So what more could Congress do to protect the First Amendment and religious liberty?
Repeat that.
What more could Congress do to protect the First Amendment and religious liberty?
Thank you. We've got the religious liberty, and also in the First Amendment is speech.
Yes.
And I think it's time for us to take seriously the erosion, it seems, of the fundamental respect for the right of people to express differing views that's occurring today. We've seen it on the college campuses. We believe that free speech is a civil right, and the Department of Justice will not stand idly by if federal constitutional rights are being constricted by unwise activities limiting speech.
So just as important to me as the First Amendment is also the Fifth Amendment to our Constitution, which prohibits the government from depriving the people of their property without due process. I'm concerned that the practice of civil asset forfeiture is increasingly threatening rights guaranteed under the Fifth Amendment to every American. While forfeiture can be an important tool for law enforcement, it has been abused. Unfortunately, in Idaho and throughout the country, you have a number of cases where the practice of civil asset forfeiture has been used to improperly deprive individuals of their homes, their cash, and their property. Because of this, I have supported several pieces of legislation and floor amendments that make reforms to the federal civil asset forfeiture. In light of the mounting evidence that civil asset forfeiture is being used improperly, how do you think we can strike the proper balance between justice and making sure criminal laws are being followed and preventing harm to innocent Americans?
I know you care about that, Congressman Labrador, and other members of Congress have expressed concerns to me. I do not take them lightly. I truly believe that if there's probable cause to believe that a item of value, often for police officers, it's a stash of cash that they may catch in an automobile. If there's probable cause to believe it's connected to a drug enterprise, they have a right to seize it. Then we need to give the person who claims it a prompt and fair hearing. You can arrest a person on probable cause and put them in jail. I think it's appropriate to hold proceeds of a drug deal at least for a trial.
I think it's appropriate to hold them, but I don't
with
think
probable cause.
I don't think it's appropriate to take them until there has been a guilty finding. In fact, Justice Thomas recently criticized the forfeiture laws, and I hope we can have a longer conversation about this, because I think this is an important issue. I've always found you to be very fair in our communications, and I think we need to reform the asset forfeiture laws in the United States, and we need to make sure that people are protected. The Fifth Amendment, to me, is just as important as the First Amendment and every other amendment of the Constitution. I think that we should work together to make sure that we strengthen it.
Some of the complaints that you've read about are state and local forfeitures and not federal. We believe our people are operating at a high standard. I'm going to have an accountability office on all of these cases, and we will not accept abuses of the law.
Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Roby, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is so great to have you here today. We're really excited to have you, Attorney General Sessions, and we just thank you for your many years of service to the state of Alabama, and now your continued work for our nation as our Attorney General. And I've known you for a very long time, and you've served our state for a very long time, and the people of Alabama know you well. So we've heard a lot about Russia today, and things you may or may not have heard, and that somehow you're guilty of collusion with Russia. So I have 2 questions for you. Have you ever worked with Russians to influence an election?
No.
Have you ever, in any capacity, personally, politically, or officially, ever done anything to hurt or harm the national security of the United States of America?
I don't believe I have. I've tried to protect the national security of our country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to move on to a different subject. I was pleased to see that your first act, official act after being sworn in as Attorney General, was to present President Trump an executive order to strengthen the enforcement of federal law on transnational criminal organizations. And so this is an important initiative to curtail the international trafficking of drugs, weapons, and human beings, often victims of sex trafficking, including young children. One of the reasons that I was eager when asked to join the Judiciary Committee earlier in this Congress was to work towards making a difference on this issue. And we have worked with the Department of Justice already on some very important policy changes, particularly to our criminal code, to that effect. Both the House and the Senate Judiciary Committees have held hearings regarding specifically the legal liability of websites hosting advertisements for prostitution, to include the prostitution and abuse of children. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act shields websites such as Backpage, Craigslist, Facebook, and many others from legal liability regarding content posted by their users. So I'm interested, we had a hearing just recently on this, and I'm really interested in finding the right balance between protecting the freedom of expression and protecting the rights of these young children who are victims, who are being abused, without impacting the innovation of the internet. And so I would appreciate your thoughts on this issue. I know that Mr. Fahrenfeld already asked you a question specific to the SAVE Act, but I think this is very important for us to get this right and do so working together, because at the end of the day, we have to find a solution, and we all want to do everything that we can to protect these children from these horrible, horrible abuses.
Thank you very much. I think that's a valuable thing for us to address. In recent days, I've talked about it with my staff. We haven't formed a clear picture of where we will go, but to the extent to which we could work with you on that, I would be pleased to.
Well, I do want to, and like I said, I think the most important thing here is that we get this right and strike that balance. As a member of this committee, to have this opportunity to fight for those who are unable to fight for themselves is a tremendous privilege, and I appreciate the partnership with the department on making sure that we get this right. So thank you so much. We appreciate you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for your excellent service to the state of Alabama.
Thank you.
No doubt.
back.
And the United States.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. And Attorney General Sessions, always good to see you. And
Thank you.
it's end of a short hearing, looks like, unless somebody else comes in. First of all, it seemed like to me you got mistreated a little bit. There were questions about your answer to Senator Franken's question, and I've got a copy of what he said. Now, he is explaining his question. He said, if there's evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? And then we even had somebody offer into the record that Mother Jones basically said you lied. And I would submit this committee doesn't need Mother Jones to inaccurately describe or depict or tell us what happened when we can look at the conversation and see for ourselves. So let me ask you, was your meeting with the Russian diplomats, was that in the course and scope of your obligations with the campaign, or in the course and scope of your duties as a United States Senator?
Well, really, they were mostly official business.
As a U.S. Senator?
I did speak at the Republican convention, but the conversation on the floor after I finished my remarks were brief, and and then with regard to the meeting in my office, it was substantively, essentially, about foreign relations between the United States and
so what you talked about with them there at the convention, it was not about a presidential campaign of Donald Trump. It was as in your capacity as a United States Senator, correct?
Well, I think so. You could say, I guess, that I was invited for other reasons, but
now, when you had talked before about that you had consulted with the career people about whether or not to recuse yourself, can you tell us whether or not one of those people with whom you consulted was Rod Rosenstein?
Yes, I could say how that occurred.
But no, I'm just
I
asking if you
understand.
did.
So I was just thinking out loud whether that's a kind of consultative relationships that
I'm not asking
should
you to reveal
reveal.
what was said. Just
I talked to another senior official in the Department of Justice who holds a position, and he also consults others within the department before he makes opinions.
well, were you aware when you recused yourself of the investigation by the Justice Department into Yandex's email account, Schlapai 2009 at Yandex? Are you Google email account marvajodo at gmail.com? You aware of those, the criminal complaint? No.
No.
All right. Were you aware that, and I've got a motion to seal here.
I don't think so. I'll
Okay.
just say it that way.
Well, yeah. Well, this was an investigation into Russia trying to corner the market with U.S. uranium. And there is actually a motion to seal. I'm sure you've filed them many times as a U.S. attorney. And this one is respectfully submitted. Rod J. Rosenstein, U.S. attorney, and Adam Akey is the assistant U.S. attorney, asking Judge William Connolly to have this Russian investigation, the investigation into the Russian effort to corner our market, to seal those records. So you were not aware that Rosenstein had this prior dealing with Russian uranium before you recused yourself, had you? You weren't aware of that, right?
Well, my recusal that we made public was for the Mueller investigation, the campaign.
Right.
Russian
Well, but that's, Mueller was appointed, but you weren't aware that Mueller had been central in the investigation before Jim Comey took over at the FBI September of 2013. So you were not aware of the Mueller-Comey investigation into Russian uranium, were you, before you recused yourself?
I don't think so. No, I was not, of course. I wasn't in the Department of Justice and wasn't aware of that when it was going on.
My time's running out, but we've got a chart here that shows just how integral the relationship is with Mr. Rosenstein, Mr. Mueller, into this whole Uranium One thing. It sure stinks to high heaven, and it doesn't appear to me they ought to be involved in investigating. But my time's run out, and I sure appreciate your service.
Thank you. I appreciate
Chairman.
your service. Mr. Chairman, I would just note that the matter that was prosecuted concerning uranium or Russian business companies was 2 years after this CFIUS investigation. And that's when Mr. Rosenstein handled it. It was brought to his office. It didn't hit his office until 2 years afterwards. And it's really unrelated to the allegations about Uranium One, as I understand it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, is
Mr.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, thank you very much for your service and your time here today. And I'll try to make this as short as I can. But representing and speaking for the sheriffs across the country and other chiefs of police as well, you know, one of the issues that I know that they have great concern about is through your grant process, if you could just have someone look at the situation where non-relevant criteria are placed on grants to require agencies to meet some performance criteria. For example, one that I was familiar with was NIMS compliant, National Incident Management System. Had absolutely nothing to do with the grant, but they put that on as a criteria for grant application. And what that does is it takes away home rule from local law enforcement. And I know several sheriffs and chiefs are very concerned about that. Have you had any issues with that you're aware of?
Well, the statute Congress passed for the grant program allows the Department of Justice to place special conditions on grants. But the one we placed that deals in the future with sanctuary cities is minimal. It simply requires a cooperative relationships where federal officials can go to the jail, and that the people at the jail can communicate with the federal law enforcement officers. Does not require the states to go arrest people or hold them past their release date. None of those things. We think it's a very reasonable thing. May still be some conditions on those grants from previous administrations, but that's the one I think that we have added to it.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that's not the one that I'm concerned about.
Okay.
In fact, the sheriffs and chiefs that I've spoken to support that wholeheartedly. So,
all right. Well, thank you. I will be glad to look at that.
But the other issue dealing with, if they can force you to be NIMS compliant, they can force you to carry revolvers versus semi-automatics. It just goes down a slippery slope. But more important than that, I want to talk to you briefly about the Viper program under TSA. That's a visible intermodal prevention and response teams that work surface transportation around our rail, our buses, our subways, those sorts of things. But there was a move at one time by TSA to actually move those Viper operations out onto public roads and highways. And there's a lot of pushback within local law enforcement on those issues as well. Have you looked into that, the legality of it? Because clearly those suspicionless searches that you go through, and every air traveler in America has been through that. It's a suspicionless search that you go through at the airport, as you know. And it's based on special needs out of a Supreme Court decision that suspends the Fourth Amendment under those special needs, and that is you have a significant threat, you have a verifiable threat to public safety. And none of that exists out on those public roads. Now, if there was a specific threat, then I don't think anybody would have issue with that. However, that's never been the case, and in fact, I was told they want to do that for training purposes within TSA, and that I think should be unacceptable.
I have not looked at that. Of course, they're not in the Department of Justice, but we may have legal opinions that could be relevant to that. But I have not engaged in that issue, Congressman.
Right, and that's why I bring it up here today to see what is your legal opinion of those suspicionless searches by TSA without the special needs concerns out of that Supreme Court decision about significant risk and the verifiable public safety threat. If you could look into that, I'd appreciate it.
I will ask about it. I sure will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from New York. If he has something placed in the record.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to place in the record an article from today's Washington Post entitled, "Has Jeff Sessions Got the World's Worst Memory or What?"
Without objection. I understand the gentlelady from Texas has something placed in the record.
Yes, sir, and a parliamentary inquiry. I just want to put in the record January 10th, 2017, Senate Judiciary hearing on the nomination of the Attorney General, and October 18th, 2017, Senate Judiciary hearing on oversight of the Justice Department. Parliamentary inquiry is
Without objection.
Thank you. The General said a number of things that I hope we can work together on, but in particular, parliamentary inquiry to be able to put in the record and require an answer to the creation of a task force on sexual crimes against children.
I don't think that's a
by the
parliamentary
DOJ.
objection.
But if I can put it in the record, please, and then also
that's a parliamentary objection.
a parliament, I'm sorry, pardon me? And then also, the parliamentary inquiry is that we will have opportunity for, questions to be put in the record, and one on the 702 reauthorization regarding sharing information with a foreign entity that interfered with the elections.
The gentlelady can submit questions for the record.
I thank the gentleman, I thank the general, for his kindness. I'll yield back.
Thank you, thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And General Sessions, you have to know that I hold you in tremendously high regard. I know you've had a bumpy ride, but there are some of us that really appreciate who you are. With that, as the Justice Department knows, the House and Senate have conducted investigations into the illegal sale of little body parts of little babies by some Planned Parenthood executives, as made clear via undercover videos that surfaced 2 years ago. And according to a report yesterday published in The Hill, the FBI sought documents the Senate obtained from abortion providers as a result of their investigation into the illegal sale of these little body parts. And so if the FBI has requested what is now several thousand pages of testimony and findings the Senate has gathered through their investigation into Planned Parenthood, that may mean that they could be readying indictments against individuals who have committed the sale of these little body parts for profit. So I want to ask a question that you can answer, not put you in an impossible spot. But generally speaking, are findings made by any Senate investigation, any subsequent referral, sufficient evidence for the Justice Department to bring charges upon any party guilty of violating federal law?
Well, it depends on the substance of those congressional findings, but they certainly can provide a basis for starting an investigation, to verifying the findings of the Congress, and could provide a basis for charges.
Well, I
think that's an appropriate way for us to relate to one another.
Yes, sir. Well, I hope the Justice Department obviously will take a very close look at the evidence that the Senate is providing to the FBI. Given the standard that you have personally demonstrated for recusal to avoid even the appearance of partiality, it seems clear to me, this is my opinion, that Mr. Mueller should recuse himself based on your standard here from investigating involving Russian collusion a long time ago. That's my perspective. I've suggested many times that the existing Russia-Trump investigation that Mr. Mueller is conducting is a snipe hunt. And as many of the members of this committee have indicated, however, there does seem to be damning evidence related to Russia and Hillary Clinton's State Department. If there had been as much evidence, in my judgment, against the president as we have against the Obama administration and Mrs. Clinton, I'm afraid Mr. Trump would have been burned at stake by now. There's a clear inequity. The FBI and the Department of Energy court documents detail an extensive, coordinated scheme of kickbacks, bribery, extortion threats, and general wrongdoing related to the acquisition of an American uranium trucking firm and the Canadian mining company Uranium One by the Russian nuclear giant Rosatom. The FBI investigation obtained an eyewitness account backed by documents indicating Russian nuclear officials routing millions of dollars to the U.S., which benefited the Clinton administration, or Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Foundation. Despite this evidence, rather than bring charges in 2010, that was not on your watch, the FBI continued the investigation for 4 more years and allowed the acquisition of 20% of our strategic uranium supply to take place without informing Congress. The head of the FBI at that time was Robert Mueller. So, General Sessions, I guess my question is really sort of just one for the record here. I think where the committee is about to close up here. What do you think the Justice Department can do to correct this seeming lack of or reversal of priority here and what appears to be to some to be an injustice? How can we just look at the evidence and the facts for what they are and do what appears to be the right thing?
Well, you raised a question that we have much going on in the Department of Justice. Yesterday, I sent, I believe, to you and to the chairman, 15 or more members of this committee, a response to a request that you made some time ago, that we're going to bring in independent prosecutors to review a host of matters out there so I can look you in the eye and tell you that we've done the right thing and we've done an objective evaluation of matters that have been raised by this committee. And hopefully we can decide if there's some matters that need to be investigated, some may need to be closed, some need to be open, some may need more money and resources and agents. So I feel like that's my responsibility.